lecture about the Bojinka plot, which is a transnational bombing airline plot devised by a number of individuals who have recent history. Tonight's lecture is going to be about the Bojinka plot, and this is often referred to as the precursor to the attacks of September 11, 2001. Many people are not aware of the plot itself, and it has many variables to the 9/11 attacks, including those involved in the intelligence services who had collected pre-intelligence regarding the people involved with the plot on a prior incident, which was the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. But as I've always said before, in order to understand the present, we have to enter the past to make use and to understand of the future as well. Between the years 1987 to 1991, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, bin Laden's brother-in-law, had moved to the Philippines and set up numerous financial fronts to benefit Al-Qaeda. Khalifa is not only one of bin Laden's brother-in-laws, but he also says that during the 1980s, that Osama bin Laden was his best friend and more than just a brother. In the mid-1980s, Khalifa was already a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood in Lebanon and ran the Peshawar, Pakistan office of the Muslim World League, where he was active in sending recruits to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan in 1989 through a Central Intelligence Agency operation called Operation Cyclone. The CIA would end up sending hundreds of millions of dollars through the Pakistan ISI to hide the fact that they were supporting the Mujahideen, not just the Afghans, but also the Arabs. Jamal Khalifa was sent to the Philippines by bin Laden in 1987 and marries two Filipino women. He sets up more than a dozen businesses and charities, all of which to appear to be fronts to fund two radical Islamic groups based in the Philippines, the Abu Sayyaf and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The Islamic Wisdom Worldwide Mission, which was one of the businesses linked to Jamal Khalifa, will be later blamed for funneling bin Laden money to militants, not just in the United States, but also to Afghanistan, the Philippines, Indonesia. The International Relations and Information Center, which is later seen as the main funding vehicle for the Bojinka plot, was also another business set up by Khalifa. It is estimated that as much as 70% of the money from these fronts are spent on militant groups and their operations. In one case, a charity that Khalifa claimed had built 30 orphanages had only built one. A number of the information which I'm going to provide to you today can be also read through a number of news articles, which I will name for you to read as well, and the dates that are involved with the report, as well as the Bojinka reports from the FBI and the Philippines investigators. Now, the Philippines will later investigate Khalifa and expel him from the country by late 1994, but he apparently never returns to head those organizations and will no longer be directly connected to these charities. But they all will continue operating despite widely reported terrorist ties, and they will usually continue to be run by Khalifa's close associates, one of them being Walid Amin Khan Shah. The United States will officially declare the Philippines branch of the Islamic Relief Organization a terrorist financier later on August 3rd, 2006. It is later reported that Ramzi Youssef, a co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing in February 26, 1993, that he is believed to have been recruited by the CIA, though details are not known. Author Richard Labiviere reported without elaboration in a 1999 book, a classified FBI file indicates that Youssef was recruited by the local branch of the CIA. The book that Labiviere had authored is Dollars for Terror, the U.S. and Islam. But there appears to be no further reporting of whether such a probe was conducted into Youssef and a CIA connection. However, FBI officials also are considering a probe of whether the CIA had any relationship with Youssef indirectly, because Youssef had fought with the CIA-financed Arab Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s. If Youssef was recruited by the CIA, it may have been in the late 1980s when the CIA recruited and trained thousands of Arabs around the world to fight in Afghanistan. In the late 1980s, Youssef was also studying engineering at a Wales college, but he'd also joined the Muslim Brotherhood while there. During a break from school in 1988, he went to one of bin Laden's training camps, the Wal Jihad in Afghanistan, and spent several months in bomb making. In 1991, counterterrorism expert Rohan Guantanara will later write that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, uncle to Ramzi Youssef, had first earned his spurs in Al-Qaeda by serving as one of Osama bin Laden's first bodyguards. However, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had never sworn loyalty to bin Laden and was never part of Al-Qaeda in the early 90s. In 1981, bin Laden had sent Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to the Philippines, where he trains members of the Abu Sayyaf and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front in bomb making and assassination. He works with bin Laden's brother-in-law, Mohammed Jamal Khalifa, to establish operational bases there and also in Malaysia. Presumably, he also works with his nephew, Youssef, who trains Abu Sayyaf militants the same year in bomb making. Guantanara says that after proving himself an outstanding organizer, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was given substantial operational authority and autonomy by bin Laden. However, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's work with the Abu Sayyaf and the Moral Islamic Liberation Front is discovered by the Philippines authorities and have been on the run since 1991. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will return with Youssef to the Philippines in 1994. By February of 1992, according to Pakistan investigators, Ramzi Youssef spent most of his time at the Bayat al-Shahuda guest house, translated from the Arabic House of Martyrs, located in Peshawar, Pakistan. The house is funded by Osama bin Laden. Pakistan investigators revealed this bin Laden-Youssef connection to the United States intelligence in March of 99, and then the CIA will publicly reveal this in 96, even though bin Laden and Youssef had never met each other personally. While living there, Youssef receives help and financing from two unnamed senior Al-Qaeda representatives, and Youssef will be arrested at another nearby bin Laden safe house, while bin Laden's address was found in his pocket. During these years, Youssef takes long trips to the U.S. in preparation for the World Trade Center bombing and the Philippines, where several plots are developed. In 1994, some authorities begin to suspect that the Philippines military is collaborating with the terrorist group Abu Sayyaf, which is linked to Al-Qaeda. In 1994, Philippine Catholic priest Father Loay Nacardo was kidnapped and held hostage by Abu Sayyaf for 2 months. He later would comment after he was released that there were many times where we passed close to military camps, and I would wonder, why isn't the military going after us? Many times we would walk near the military camps, about 50 meters away, and we were never bothered by the army, even though my captors and I could actually see them just a few feet away. It would have been impossible for the army not to spot us, as we were moving in a large group. There were about 20 of us. He would also later say that he sometimes overheard Abu Sayyaf commanders talking about arms shipments from government sources, and that weapons and ammunition boxes used by the group were marked as coming from the Philippine military. What he didn't know was Abu Sayyaf had an inside informant working with the Philippines military. His name was Edwin Angelines, who had become the number 2 in Abu Sayyaf. Oftentimes, he would take part in kidnappings and bombings of Catholic churches throughout the Philippines in the 1990s. In the early 1994, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed moves to the Philippines for a year, planning an operation which would later be named Oplan Bojinka. Operation Bojinka. Police later say he would live a very expensive and non-religious lifestyle. According to a Los Angeles Times report dated June 24, 2002, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed went to karaoke bars and go-go clubs and dates the dancers there, stays in 4-star hotels, and takes scuba diving lessons. Once he rents a helicopter just to fly it past the window of a girlfriend's office in an attempt to impress her. This appears to be a pattern, for instance, in which he had a huge drinking party in 1998. Officials believe his obvious access to large sums of money indicate that some larger network is backing him by this time. Some of that money were coming from Khalifa's businesses, which I outlined just previously. One of the participants in Bojinka is a Pakistani businessman with alleged ties to the Pakistan ISI in the drug trade. This Pakistani is said to use counterfeit U.S. currency to help fund the Bojinka plot. It has been suggested that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a Pakistani, is able to operate as he pleases during the 1990s, as he is linked to the Pakistan ISI by 1993. His brother, Mohammed, had worked and known officials high up in the government. His hedonistic time in the Philippines resembles reports of hijackers Muhammad Atta and Marwan al-Shehi when they lived in the Philippines in 1998 to 2000. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed returns to the Philippines occasionally, is even spotted there after the events of September 11th, 2001. A young Indonesian nicknamed Hambali, real name Ridwan Isamuddin, forms a front company that has ties to Al-Qaeda, which figures to be a part of the Bojinka plot, an early version of the 9/11 plot. Hambali had fought in Afghanistan in the late 1980s and reportedly had met bin Laden there and allied himself to the bin Laden cause. In 1994, Hambali, living in the village north of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, began frequently receiving visitors. One of them was Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Also, in September of 94, Ramzi Youssef had trained with members of the Abu Sayyaf. While there, Edwin Angelines, an informant inside the Abu Sayyaf, noticed 2 individuals. They were white, visiting the capital of Cebu. One man was nicknamed the Farmer. Later on, the 2 men would be known for more notorious bombing inside the United States. The 2 men that Edwin Angelines had seen were Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh. Edwin Angelines had nicknamed Terry Nichols the Farmer, for Terry Nichols had a Filipino wife whose family lived in Cebu City. Just weeks later, the government building in Oklahoma was bombed, the Murrah P. Building. In the same fashion as the World Trade Center bombing, a urea nitrate bomb encased in a barrel, which was housed in a yellow Ryder truck. Ramzi Youssef would arrive in Manila along with other Arab Afghans who were linked to him, who were creating small operational cells in Manila. He began work making bombs, showing up in Singapore with Walid Khan Ahmed Shah in the autumn of '94. The two got their Philippine visas in Singapore, which were later fabricated. Youssef left Manila for several days, but was met by Islamic emissaries upon his return to Metro Manila. They asked him to attack U.S. President Bill Clinton, who was due to arrive in the Philippines on November 12, 1994, as part of a 5-day tour of Asia. Youssef thought of several ways to kill the president, including placing nuclear bombs on Clinton's motorcade route, firing a Stinger missile at Air Force One, or the presidential limousine, launching theater ballistic missiles at Manila, and or killing him with phosgene, a chemical weapon. He abandoned the idea as it would be too difficult to kill the president because of the high security detail. In the autumn of 1994, Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed started testing airport security. Youssef booked a flight between Kai Tak International Airport in Hong Kong and Taiyuan International Airport, New Taipei. Mohammed booked a flight between Ninoy Aquino International Airport near Manila and Kimpo International Airport, New Seoul. The two had already converted 14 bottles of contact lens solution into bottles containing nitroglycerin, which were readily available in the Philippines. Youssef had taped a metal rod to the arch of his foot, which would serve as a detonator. The two wore jewelry and clothing with metal to confuse airport security. To support their claim that they're meeting women, they packed condoms in their bags. On December 8, 1994, Ramzi Youssef moved into the Donia Josefa apartments under the alias Naji Awata Haddad and purported himself to be a Moroccan. Edith Guerra, the manager, laughed with the receptionist after the two men asked for new registration forms, in which Guerra would later remark, "Perhaps they've forgotten their names," she said, as their first ones were torn up. Youssef had accidentally put his actual name on the first form. Youssef had booked room 603 in advance and had a deposit before taking the elevator up to room 603. A co-conspirator, Abdul Hakim Murad, went to Manila with Youssef and stayed at the same apartment. The apartments are located in the Malay district, which is 200 meters away from the Holy See's diplomatic mission in the Philippines. Over time, people became suspicious of the men in room 603, who were described as being very secretive. According to Edith Guerra, they gave me the impression that they were here to study. They looked like students. They double-locked the door when they were inside or out. They didn't ask the room boy to clean up the room. The men, who had chemical burns on their hands, were carrying boxes and never hired other people to carry them up. The boxes contained chemicals bought from suppliers in Manila and Quezon City in Metro Manila, where Youssef used these to make his bombs. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed purported himself to be a Saudi or Qatari plywood exporter named Abdul Majid. In reality, Youssef and Mohammed had already started planning Operation Bojinka by this time. According to Abdul Hakim Murad, Youssef got an idea for crashing a plane into the Central Intelligence Agency's headquarters from Murad while at the apartments. According to Murad, Yusuf replied, "Okay, we will think about it," before heading off with Muhammad to Puerto Galera for scuba diving. Yusuf's first operational test of the bomb was inside a mall in Cebu City. The bomb detonated several hours after he put it in a generator room. It caused minor damage, but it proved to Yusuf that his bomb was workable. On December 1st, 1994, Walid Khan Amin Shah placed a bomb under a seat in the Greenbelt Theater in Manila to test what would happen if a bomb exploded under an airline seat. The bomb went off, injuring several patrons. On December 11th, 1994, Yusuf built another bomb, which had 1/10 of the power that his final bombs were planned to have, in the lavatory of an aircraft. He left it inside the life jacket under his seat and got off the plane with it and arrived in Cebu. Yusuf had boarded the flight under the assumed name of Armando Forlani, using a false Italian passport. The aircraft was Philippine Airlines Flight 434 on a Manila to Narita route, stopping partway at Cebu. Yusuf had set the timer for 4 hours ahead after he got off the aircraft. The bomb exploded while the aircraft was over Japan's Minimaldi Island, which is part of the Okinawa prefecture. A Japanese businessman named Haruki Ikegami, who was occupying the seat where the bomb was placed, was killed. The part that survived the bombing was the torso on up, which blocked the hole at the bottom, which was where the bomb was sat. It also injured an additional 10 passengers. The flight was carrying 273 passengers in total. The blast blew a hole in the floor, which was blocked by the torso of Hikigami, and the cabin's rapid expansion severed several control cables in the ceiling, cutting off control of the plane's right aileron, as well as both the captain and the first officer's steering controls. The seat that Yusuf chose to plant the bomb would be positioned directly over the central fuel tank, and the detonation of the bomb would have caused a crippling explosion. But on this particular airframe, a former Scandinavian Airlines aircraft, the seat was 2 rows forward from normal. The flight crew miraculously kept control of the Boeing 747-200 and brought it into an emergency landing at Naha Airport in Okinawa. Satisfied with the deadly results of the attack, Yusuf then planned which flights to attack for Phase 2 of the plot. There would be a number of different phases in the plot. Phase 1. The first plan was to assassinate Pope John Paul II when he visited the Philippines during World Youth Day celebrations. On January 15, 1995, a suicide bomber would dress up as a priest while John Paul II passed in a motorcade on his way to the San Carlos Seminary in Makati, Philippines. The assassin planned to get close to the Pope and detonate the bomb. The planned assassination of the Pope was intended to divert attention from the next phase of the operation. About 20 men have been trained by Yusuf to carry out Phase 2. The details of Phase 2 would be that at least 5 terrorists, including Yusuf, Walid Khan Amin Shah, and Abdul Hakim Murad, beginning on January 21st of 1995 and ending on January 22nd, 1995, would have placed bombs on 11 United States-bound airliners, which had stopovers scattered throughout East Asia and Southeast Asia. All of the flights had 2 legs. The bombs would be planted inside life jackets under seats of the first leg, and each bomber would then disembark. He would then board 1 or 2 more flights and repeat. After all the bombers had planted bombs on all the flights, each man would then catch flights to Lahore, Pakistan. The men never needed U.S. visas, as they would have been on planes for the first legs in Asia. United States Airlines had been chosen instead of Asian Airlines so as to maximize the shock toward Americans. The flights targeted were listed under operatives with code names Zayed, Majbos, Markoa, Merkas, and Obaid. Obaid was Abdul Hakim Murad, who was to hit United Flight 80, and then he was to go back to Singapore on another United flight, which he would bomb. Zayed was Ramzi Youssef, was to target Northwest Flight 30, a United flight going from Taipei to Honolulu, and a United flight going from Bangkok to Taipei to San Francisco. The explosions were to be timed by the operatives before they disembarked from the plane. The aircraft would have exploded over the Pacific Ocean and the South China Sea almost simultaneously. If this plan had worked, several thousand passengers would have perished, and air travel would likely have been shut down worldwide. The U.S. government estimated the prospective death toll to be about 6,000 people if the plot had been executed. For comparison, about 3,000 people were killed in the 9/11 attacks. This is according to a Washington Post, September 11, 2013, headlined 9 Facts About Terrorism Inside the United States. If phase 2 of the plot had been successful, it would have been, in terms of casualties, the most devastating terrorist attack in American history. The bombs, which were called Mark II microbombs, had Casio digital watches as the timers, stabilizers that looked like cotton wool balls, and an undetachable quantity of nitroglycerin as the explosive. Other ingredients included glycerin, nitrate, sulfuric acid, and minute concentrations of silver azide and nitrobenzene. 2 9-volt batteries in each bomb were used as a power source. The batteries would be connected to a light bulb filament that would detonate the bomb. Murad and Youssef wired a silicon-controlled rectifier as the switch to trigger the filaments to detonate the bomb. There was an external socket hidden where the wires were pushed under the watch base as the bomber would wear it. This alteration was so small that the watch could still be worn in a normal manner. Youssef got batteries past airport security during his December 11th test bombing of Philippines Airlines Flight 434 by hiding them in the hollowed-out heels of his shoes. Youssef smuggled the nitroglycerin on board by putting it inside a small container, which was a contact lens cleaning solution container. The airports planned to be targeted were the following: Kai Tak Airport in Hong Kong, New Tokyo International Airport in Japan, the Ninoy Aquino International Airport in the Philippines, the Singapore Changi Airport in Singapore, the Bangkok International Airport in Thailand, the Gimpo International Airport in South Korea, the Honolulu International Airport in Hawaii, John F. Kennedy in New York City, Los Angeles International Airport in Los Angeles, Chicago O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, and the San Francisco International Airport in San Francisco. Phase 3 of the Bojinka plot, in which was found out by Abdul Hakim Murad's confession later, would have involved Murad either renting, buying, or hijacking a small airplane, preferably a Cessna. The airplane would be filled with explosives. He would then crash it into the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters in the Langley area of Fairfax County, Virginia. Abdul Hakim Murad had been trained as a pilot in North Carolina and was slated to be a suicide pilot. There were alternate plans to hijack a 12th commercial airliner and use that instead of the small aircraft, possibly due to the Manila cell growing frustration with explosives. Testing explosives in a house or apartment is indeed dangerous, and it can easily give away a terrorist plot. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed probably made the alternate plans. A report from the Philippines to the United States on January 20th, 1995 stated, quote, "What the subject has in mind is that he will board any American commercial aircraft pretending to be an ordinary passenger. Then he will hijack said aircraft, control its cockpit, and dive it in CIA headquarters," end quote. The plot was abandoned after an apartment fire at room 603. The fire occurred before Pope John Paul II was scheduled to visit the Philippines on January 12th. In the evening of January 6, 1995, Abdul Hakim Murad was mixing chemicals in a sink and started a chemical fire on the 6th floor of the Josefa apartment. By pouring water on the substance, the fire was exasperated. It was spotted at about 11 p.m. after residents complained about a strange odor. Edith Guerra, the manager, called the fire brigade, but the fire went out unassisted. Yusuf and Murad had told the firefighters to stay away before they fled. Police Major Francisco Bautista and his staff, including Watch Commander Ada D. Fariscal, decided to investigate the situation and saw inside the room 4 hot plates in their packing crates, what looked like cotton balls soaked in a beige solution, and loops of green, red, blue, and yellow electrical wiring. The telephone rang, and the police ran downstairs thinking it was a trap. Fariscal had been suspicious of the room 603 due to the recent wave of bombings that hit Metro Manila and the Philippines Airlines Flight 434. She went and sought out a search warrant. They left and asked 11 judges before finding one that would grant the warrant. In a Los Angeles Times article dated 2002, it stated that the police deliberately set a fire to rouse the men out of the apartment. However, there is a lacking of evidence showing that this report was true. After police discovered the evidence inside the room, which was enormous, one man went back to try and retrieve a laptop that was left in the room. Ramzi Youssef had the entire Operation Bojinka plot and the operators and the money providers on the laptop itself, including the airlines which were to be hit. Abdul Hakim Murad resoundingly and remarkably agreed to go back to fetch the laptop. As he went upstairs, everybody that was at the apartment turned around. He then fled. They gave chase. Murad tripped over a fallen tree line, and he was detained and later arrested. He gave the name Ahmed Saeed, but then later proved to be Abdul Hakim Murad. He claimed to be a commercial pilot, was on his way to the precinct house to explain that what he claimed to be firecrackers had gone off. The arresting officer, having lost his handcuffs, improvised a solution by tying Murad's hands with the elastic cord taken from the officer's raincoat. Murad was hauled to a precinct in a taxi van with the help of 2 other people. He offered $22,000 to the policemen if they would agree to let him go, but the officers refused. Ramzi Youssef, witnessing his arrest from afar, walked into the night and disappeared. At the precinct, Murad signed a statement saying that he was innocent and that he was a tourist visiting his friend in the chemical import-export business. He then mumbled about, quote, 2 Satans that must be destroyed, the Pope and America. Ada Fariscal, one of the arresting officers, was later depicted in a 2006 docudrama, The Path to 9/11, which was a 2-part miniseries that aired on ABC on September 10th, 2006. She spent 17 years as a homemaker before enrolling in the police department in 1977. Her decision to investigate the fire was key to disrupting the plot and forcing Yusuf to flee. When the officers returned to Suite 603 at 2:30 in the morning, they found street maps of Manila with routes plotting the papal motorcade, a rosary, a photograph of Pope John Paul II, Bibles, crucifixes, papal confessions, priest clothing, as well as chemicals of sulfuric acid, picric acid, nitric acid, glycerin, acetone, nitrobenzenol, ammonia, silver nitrate, several cans of gasoline, including kettles, funnels, fuses, filters, mortars, beakers, timers, switches, and circuit breakers. The most conclusive piece of evidence found was a manual written in Arabic on how to build a liquid bomb. There was also 12 false passports, including Norwegian, Afghan, Saudi, and Pakistani passports that were also found in the apartment. Investigators also found a business card of Mohammed Jamal Khalifa and telephone numbers of the businesses that were linked to Khalifa in the early 90s in the Philippines. Yusuf's computer was discovered and the project of Bojinka on 4 floppy disks on an off-white Toshiba laptop 2 weeks before the plot would have been implemented. Several encrypted files on the hard drive contained flight schedules, calculations of detonation timers, and other items. The first string of text in one of the files states that, quote, all people who support the U.S. government are our targets in our future plans, and that is because all those people are responsible for the government's actions and they support the U.S. foreign policy and are satisfied with it. We will hit all U.S. nuclear targets. If the U.S. government keeps supporting Israel, then we will continue to carry out operations inside and outside the United States to include, end quote, which is where the text ended. A file named Bojinka lists the 11 flights between Asia and the United States, which were grouped under 5 code names: setting, timer, Bojinka, and Bojinka 2. The laptop had names of dozens of associates, including some photographs of a few of them, and included contact information for Mohammed Jamal Khalifa. They also contained records of information about 5-star hotels, dealings with a London trading corporation, a meat market owner in Malaysia, and an Islamic center in Tucson, Arizona, linked to the Maktab al-Khidmat, also known as the Afghan Services Bureau, and information about how money moved to an Abu Dhabi banking firm was also found. A communication signed Khalid Sheikh plus Bojinka was also found on Yusuf's computer that threatened to attack targets in response to the financial, political, and military assistance given to the Jewish state in the occupied land of Palestine by the U.S. government. The letter also threatened to assassinate Fidel Ramos, then the president of the Philippines, as well as an attack aircraft if the United States did not meet the group's demands. The letter said the group claiming responsibility was the 5th Division of the Liberation Army. In 1996, an Associated Press headliner alleged 9/11 plotter lived lavishly in the Philippines, written by Jim Gomez, in which the article stated that a confidential Philippine police report prepared by Mendoza's report on the interrogation of Abdul Hakim Murad, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and Abdul Hakim Murad, and Osama Asmuri, an Al-Qaeda agent known as Wali Khan Ahmed Shah, coordinated with Al-Qaeda support networks in the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, with groups such as Abu Sayyaf and Jemaah Islamiyah, while planning Operation Bojinka. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had traveled to Israel and the United States, according to part of this classified report. Colonel Rodolfo Mendoza took over the investigation and interrogated Abdul Hakim Murad. According to Mendoza's report, details of a post-Bojinka second wave emerged. One of the few authors who reported on this was Peter Lance in his book, 1,000 Years for Revenge, in which Peter Lance calls this phase the virtual blueprint for the 9/11 attacks. Abdul Hakim Murad revealed a plan to hijack 12 commercial airliners at some point after the effect of Bojinka had died down. Murad himself had been training in the United States for this plot, and he said that there were secret cells inside the United States that would be part of this plot. He names 10 or so buildings that we targeted for attack, including the Pentagon, an unidentified nuclear power plant, the Transamerica Tower in San Francisco, the Sears Tower in Chicago, the World Trade Center, the John Hancock Tower in Boston, the U.S. Capitol, and the White House. This would surprise Rodolfo Mendoza and Philippines investigators, suggesting that even before the Bojinka plot, that there were covert cells inside the United States that were waiting on orders to hijack planes throughout the early 1990s. Murad continues to reveal more information about this plot until he is handed over to the FBI in April of 1995. He also mentions that 10 suicide pilots have been chosen already and have been training in the United States, most notably in Oklahoma and Arizona. Mendoza uses what he learns from Murad and other sources to make a flowchart connecting many key Al-Qaeda figures in the spring of '95. Philippines authorities would later claim that they provided all of this information to U.S. authorities. However, the United States fails to follow up on any of it. Sam Karmilowicz, a security official at the U.S. Embassy in Manila, Philippines during this time period, will later claim that just before Murad was deported to the United States in early May, he picked up an envelope concerning all that the Philippines government had learned from Murad. He then sent the envelope to a U.S. Justice Department office in New York City. He believed that Mike Garcia and Dietrich Snell, assistant U.S. attorneys, in which Snell would later be part of the 9/11 Commission report, who would later prosecute Murad, almost certainly had access to this evidence as early as 1995. Many of the Bojinka plotters are arrested in the Philippines and then let go. On April 1st, the Philippines police arrest 6 foreigners who were from Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Incidentally, those within the September 11th plots would also have contacts and also operators from these countries as well. They seize a cache of weapons and explosives in their apartments. It is announced the men have ties to Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, also known as the Blind Sheikh, from the Egyptian terrorist group the Gamma Islamiyah, as well as Ramzi Youssef, and they are charged with stockpiling illegal firearms. On December 30th, 1995, 15 more suspects are arrested. The group is made up of Iraqi, Sudanese, Saudi, and Pakistani nationals. They are found with guns and explosives. One of them is identified as Ramzi Youssef's twin brother, Abed al-Karim Youssef, who had been using the alias Adel Anan. Philippine authorities would later claim that not only were these men involved in the Bojinka plot, but they were also planning to assassinate President Fidel Ramos, and commanders of the Philippine Army and National Police. Edwin Angelines, the undercover operative that I was talking to you about, Abu Sayyaf, was investigating the operation from within and knew all the individuals involved with the Bojinka plot that were members of also Abu Sayyaf. However, he would later claim that not only all of them were guilty and that some of them were framed by the planting of weapons of their evidence, he would go public with this complaint in early of 96. All of the men are released on bail, and all of them jump bail. Some flee the Philippines, while others stay and go into hiding. It is not known what happens to most of these men after their release, but one of the men arrested in March of 1995, Hadi Yusuf Agul, will be arrested in the Philippines in late 2001. He would be found with nearly 300 sticks of dynamite and accused of involvement in other bombing plots as well. It will be reported that Abid al-Karim Yusuf was recently traveling with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and in the wake of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's 2003 arrest, he is capable of taking over as Al-Qaeda's operational commander. It has not been explained why the Philippines did not turn him over to the United States, since the U.S. had put out an alert for him in March of 1995, shortly after Ramzi Yusuf was arrested. On April 16th of 1995, Newsday would report that some crucial computer evidence against notorious terrorist suspect Ramzi Yusuf had been destroyed, and the FBI had begun an investigation into whether the CIA was responsible. After the Bojinka plot was foiled, a computer hard drive and several floppy disks were discovered in the apartment. Pictures and phone numbers were recovered from the hard drive. The computer files were copied by Philippine authorities and then turned over to the CIA. The CIA then provided the FBI with a summary of the files, indicating they contained detailed information about Yusuf's co-conspirators in the United States and overseas, including their names, addresses, and in some cases, even phone numbers. But when the CIA turned over the actual computer and disks, the Justice Department experts determined that at least 3 separate computer deletion programs have been used to erase some of the data. Law enforcement would later claim that one U.S. law enforcement official would later complain to his superiors, "We had teams of investigators frothing at the mouth to get at Yusuf's network and had teams of investigators handed over an empty computer. It's as if we've been tracking a serial killer and someone intentionally shredded the investigative file." Officials believe it is not likely the files would ever be recovered. Newsday would also report that the FBI is investigating whether CIA agents or their operatives intentionally destroyed the evidence. Since Philippine authorities made copies of the files, the FBI had tried to get copies directly from them, but without success. A search of the LexisNexis database shows no follow-up to the story, but only 3 Bojinka plotters, Ramzi Yusuf, Abdul Hakim Murad, and Wali Khan Hamid Shah, are arrested in the years prior to the September 11th attacks, and the rest of the network goes free. In the end, the Bojinka plot was in essence the precursor to the September 11th terrorist attacks. This information was provided to the FBI and the Department of Justice, as well as the State Department, in 1995, 6 years prior to the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. The question is, why didn't U.S. officials and the State Department heighten security in immigration and the airline industry, knowing that the airlines were primed to be victims of a terrorist attack? Why didn't they take the prerequisite acts to build upon the security apparatus inside the United States? And why did the Central Intelligence Agency destroy incriminating evidence of the Bojinka plot and the co-conspirators involved? We have no answers for those questions, and we're left with more questions than answers, as usual. The FBI debriefing of Abdul Hakim Murad can be seen on my WordPress in detail. And if you go to my WordPress and type in FBI debriefing of Abdul Hakim Murad, you will notice I have a number of those reports, as well as Philippine police reports of Abdul Hakim Murad in 1995, if you look up those reports as well at your leisure. And what I'll do is I will open it up for questions and answers. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. Darren Harvey, please come on up. You're muted, buddy.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Darren. Yeah.
Hey, again, I just want to thank you for your time for doing this. This is something that's very important for researchers to know. Absolutely, and just important information here, because this is the blueprint for 9/11. Just want to point something out real quick. During the 9/11 attacks, we were told that we were attacked by religious fundamentalists and that they hated us for our freedoms. Well, I just want to point out here with the Bojinka plot, it's kind of the opposite, right? Because we have Ramzi Youssef, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. You know, their lifestyle was quite the opposite. They enjoyed women, partied, went to karaoke bars, dressed in Armani suits. You know, they were living that Western lifestyle. So that kind of goes against that narrative of being very religious. Then also, too, with Murad during his confessions, we were always told that they hate us for our freedoms, but he kind of told the opposite again. It's our policies in the Middle East, and sticking our nose where our business doesn't belong. So that's just another thing to point out, that it's not due to they hate our freedoms, but it's quite the opposite. It's our foreign policy in the Middle East and our relationship with Israel. Thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And now this is actually purported by George Bush after September 11th, right? That the reason why they attacked us was because we are a secular lifestyle. It's anti-ethical to Islam, and that Islam was blamed for the motivations of the attacks. Well, that's untrue. And as you pointed out, Darren, even during the Bojinka plot attacks, you had a number of associates and operators that were anything but living a pious lifestyle. Now, this is why I tend to study the ideology of Wahhabism. But if you study Wahhabism, you'll understand that it's antithetical to Islam. And I'm not going to basically give a general rundown of Wahhabism. I would suggest everybody in this room to basically, read, if you want to go to like any Islamic scholar website and read about what Wahhabism is. It's not Islamic at all. It's made by a nomad Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who basically was part of the creation of the Emirate of Diriyah in the 17th century, which later became Saudi Arabia. And what we have in Saudi Arabia today is partly responsible for the influence of these groups like Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, Islamic State and Levant, Boko Haram, all these other terrorist groups. They are not Islamic. They're basically created out of this ideology called Wahhabism, which is antithetical to Islam, to the faith itself, to the Prophet Muhammad. And so we have this reaction from the U.S. military that says we're having a war on terrorism, but that's pretty vague in its own right. What are we having a war? Well, I think we're having a war on Islam itself. We went and attacked countries that had nothing to do with 9/11, like Iraq, for example, and later on Syria, Libya, and of course Pakistan. Well, Pakistan had some links, but that wasn't the case in terms of having the operators coming from there. Okay, I got Luigi. He's coming up. Yeah, Luigi.
Sure. Thank you. It was a great talk, and I really enjoyed it. Early on, you mentioned how Ramzi Youssef had met with um, Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh, and I was just wondering because I had read the Turner Diaries, which is this neo-Nazi screed.
Mhm.
In it, they mention September 11th actually is the author's birthday, um, and in the book there's multiple terrorist attacks that take place, and the whole book comes across as like being a sort of a blueprint. Sorry to divert from what we were just talking about, but uh, there's uh, there's a point in the book where the end of the book really where the main character straps himself into a plane and flies it into the Pentagon on 11/9. And earlier in the book he talks about um, the great Houston bombings of September 11th and 12th. So really I'm just confused. I wonder what is the not neo-Nazi connection to all of this, because Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were white supremacists and so on. So that's really my question. Where does that fit into all of this?
Well, okay. Anything that you bring up the Turner Diaries, I know the Turner Diaries. I never read it, so I will not speak on something that I've never read. So, but not to dissuade from the question you raised. In a book written by Richard Clarke, Against All Enemies, he basically said that the FBI was investigating Khalid Sheikh Mohammed for a very long time with his connections to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, in which when Ramzi Youssef fled to the Philippines, he was training Abu Sayyaf, a Philippines group that had an informant inside it, for bomb-making operations. They were bombing Christian churches in Malaysia, and also Abu Sayyaf was pretty proficient when it came to kidnappings as well. That's how they started getting their funding. According to this, the FBI, they basically said that during that month, I forgot the month. It's in autumn. I'm sorry, I don't know which was the. I want to be right about it. The month in which they went to. Oh, I'm sorry. It was spring. It was weeks before April that Terry Nichols had visited Cebu City, and his wife is Filipino, and she had relatives there, and that he went with another individual. That individual later was Timothy McVeigh. And before that, they were testing bombs, like they were creating bombs in like small makeshift bottles, and they were not having any progress made in making a bomb that would be used in a huge setting. So for some reason, I guess they went to the Philippines, but it just so happens that while they were visiting in Cebu City, it just so happens that Ramzi Youssef was there. And that the same bomb that was used in the Oklahoma City bombing was the same bomb used in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. As well as another irony is that the truck that they used to transport the bomb was the same one used in the 1983 World Trade Center bombing. It was a yellow Ryder truck. And that the bomb that was used was urea nitrate. Same bomb, same use, and the same training methods that were used at the Wild Jihad training camp in Afghanistan, in which Ramzi Youssef and a co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Ahmed Ajaj. Ajaj had his own nefarious past in which he himself was not a terrorist, but he was someone who was making counterfeit dollars, and he was arrested by the Israeli police, in which he was visited by the Mossad in a jail cell, and this was written by Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, that the Mossad made a deal with him and said that if you were to infiltrate Arabic groups like Hezbollah, you continue working with us, we'll get you out of this mess in prison, in which he did. Now, I'm not going to say and make the next step because I have no evidence that Ahmed Ajaj was still working with Israeli police or the Mossad when the 1993 World Trade Center bombing took place. Ramzi Youssef basically did call Ahmadinejad from time to time. In the same fashion that Ramzi Youssef visited the Philippines, and it just so happened that he trained Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh to build a urea nitrate bomb. According to Richard Clark, too many coincidences. And that's what I have to say to that. But I cannot speak about any neo-Nazi connections to the Oklahoma City bombing, although it is asserted that there are some between neo-Nazis and Arabic fundamentalist groups. The one thing they both have in common, I would say, is that their vitriol toward the Zionist state of Israel, which would make sense. And both groups, incidentally enough, also are prime intelligence services basically infiltrate with ease, because these are right-wing, ultra-Orthodox groups. One is a nationalist group, one is a religious group, in which it is quite easy to infiltrate these groups. And they've been doing it for a very, very long time. And by infiltrating these groups, you can also manipulate them and move them in a way where you would precipitate a terrorist action in which you can benefit from said action. And whatever benefit comes, it could be a variable, various ways, whether it be foreign policy or implementing legislature later on down the road. Any other questions at all? We still got some people in the room. I still got listeners, so I can still answer some questions if you want. If not, I can end it here, and we'll do this again next week. Sean, please go ahead.
Okay, am I on?
Sir.
Hey, all right, thanks. Well, that was an excellent talk, Adam. I think there were even a couple of things in there that I had forgotten about. That was fantastic. I suppose what I could touch on briefly is the concept of the white supremacists and what we were mostly talking about on this Bojinka discussion is sort of the pro-Palestinian militant. Well, I could see some similarities in ideological motivation, even though they're sort of coming from different angles. I could see some similarities between, say, like the white nationalist and the Islamist. They have some common enemies, and they definitely have some similarities in the way they go about things. Um, a violent religious supremacist and a violent ethnic supremacist both have commonality. Aren't we talking about extreme right-wing groups again, really, if we're comparing these two things? I think it's really interesting to talk about Bojinka for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons that I think Bojinka is important to cover, and I think you even kind of laid it out at the beginning of your talk, was it's a sort of a jumping off point. Bojinka is really, it's great for discussing modus operandi and analyzing the network that has sort of a periphery about things like the 1993 World Trade Center attack and even 9/11. So much like Malaysia for Al Qaeda, the Bojinka in the Philippines is sort of a jumping off point. You just have to know that it exists. That's why I think it's fascinating that people in the conspiracy theory world always talk about Operation Northwoods, which is fine and all. I think it's great to know about it. But Bojinka is really left alone, and not very many people want to cover Bojinka. In fact, there's not very much documentaries about Bojinka. Even the word Bojinka is really difficult to nail down if you're running search engines and just trying to find data. Actually, it's such a bizarre word that I'm not even 100% convinced that Bojinka isn't just a made-up word. I don't think one thing you covered was it's a name, it's a code name for this project, and it's strange that KSM has this name for this idea. It allegedly it's Serbocroat for large explosion or big bang. I can't verify that. Anybody listening, please verify it and get back to me if you speak Serbocroat. It's such an interesting concept of Bojinka, and there's so many directions that you can go from it. One of them, it ties immediately back to where you always start, Adam, which is the Arab-Afghan War, because, or excuse me, the Afghan-Soviet War, because of the Arab-Afghan presence there, the way, like, say, for instance, the Saudis are sort of supporting it, and you've got characters like Wali Shah involved with Bojinka, and he fought as an Arab Afghan, and he's like a Saudi national, even though he's like Turkish ethnic background. And I think that's another bizarre concept in all of this, is the way this apparently global network is functioning. Just like you alluded to, KSM doesn't really need bin Laden's money. KSM is apparently already functional before he even meets with Al Qaeda in like the late 1990s. I think dates like 1997, 1996 are floated around. It's not that he needs bin Laden's help to do this stuff. So it's interesting that he sort of links up with this fledgling Al Qaeda right around the time that UBL decides that he wants to issue fatwas, incidentally. It's really calamity of timing for a lot of this stuff. But I like to look at Bojinka in the sort of evolutionary sense. The way you can place it on the chronology of terrorist history. And even though it didn't come to fruition, there's a lot known about it. So it's a detailed specimen, even though it's not something like the 93 bombing that actually happened. But you can still look at the network that it happens on, the conspirators, what they were trying to do, and all the data is pretty clear about it. I guess that kind of goes back to something that you mentioned also about, like, why does Condoleezza Rice need to reassure people that something like this could not have been conceivable, when clearly it was very conceivable, and absolutely everybody that had the job of looking at things like this, they were well aware of it. I see it as happening, like you alluded to, the OKC bombing, which of course you have the comparison with the 1993 attack. You can even drag it back a little further into the late 80s. And so you have this early 90s, late 80s time frame. But let's say start at something that was kind of the 9/11 of its day, was the Lockerbie bombing. And that's basically dealing with baggage handling. And for a few years later to have something like Bojinka, that's operatives passing as passengers. But it's also operatives having the difficult job. Apparently, if you just look at the history of how well these things go, it's hit and miss. They also have the job of basically assembling these bombs on site in the Bojinka modus. So Ramzi Youssef's a great example of how difficult it is to work with these bombs. Youssef's not particularly successful in my eyes. He wants these grand things that, like, basically you realize it with something like a 9/11, but he wants these grand things with terrible, terrible casualty counts, and he never really achieves it. His 1993 World Trade Center bomb is terrifying. It's terrifying, but it's not enough. It only kills 6 people, I think is what the number is. It didn't work. It failed. He was even glum about it, I believe. Isn't there the story about the FBI agent that apprehends Yosef and wants to kind of punk Yosef about how he failed, and Yosef is so proud that he says, well, I didn't have the funding, which itself speaks to the concept of what is a Ramzi Yosef, because he's a Pakistani, but he's a Palestinian, but he works with Saudis, and he's like some kind of gun for hire almost. Why else would he complain about his funding? Which itself is weird because KSM is his uncle, and it's KSM's network that all this is occurring on. And KSM seems to have a good network, but KSM doesn't have problems. Like Yosef's man Ajaj gets apprehended in the United States when they arrive. That's a problem. That probably shouldn't happen. Even if Ahmed Ajaj is possibly the better bomb maker, Ajaj isn't blind in one eye and he doesn't blow his fingertips off, and he definitely didn't teach Hakim Murad to the poor degree that Murad starts a chemical fire with like basic bomb making mistakes. They run the test runs and they don't really have anything grand to speak of there. Yosef's best most successful terrorism is actually killing Shia Muslims of all things, and what a great irony that is. When he's alleged to have been the terrorist that bombs the Reza Shrine during Ashura, where he kills a couple of dozen Shia Muslims. And I think that's where I see where maybe KSM saw it. It could have been KSM who saw the problem with these bombings. It's maybe making things more complicated than it needs to be when you've.
Go ahead, Sean. You're on mute. We lost you there. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Sean. Hey, yeah. Listen, a lot of good points you raised here too. There seems to be like a nexus connection regarding Bojinka and to the 93 bombing and terrorist plots, even September 11, 2001. And the nexus even reaches out to even past history, the Afghan-Soviet War, if you will, that you mentioned also as well. And that this nexus of the Bojinka plot, which was a failed plot, by the way, and you'll notice also too, and there's other failed plots would have been precipitating even bigger than the plots that did succeed. For example, like the Landmarks bombing plot, which would have killed more people than the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. But if they would have gotten more money for the bomb to be built bigger, the World Trade Center bombing itself would have been probably even bigger than 9/11 attacks, because what Yusuf wanted to do was have the tower fall into the North Tower and both towers just fall into Lower Manhattan, which would have been just outright devastating. Bojinka was approximately 6,000 killed if it was successful. Landmarks plot, they wanted to kill approximately 5,000 people if it was successful, which dwarfed the 6 that were killed in the bombing of the World Trade Center in '93. And then you got the attacks that were attributed to bin Laden, which wasn't evident to the Covert Towers bombing, for example. East Africa embassy bombings, which he didn't deny, but he didn't take credit for. The only bombings that were to his credit were allegedly was the September 11th attacks and the USS Cole bombings. But Bojinka plot had operatives from Pakistan and operatives from abroad as well. I mean, you had people that were arrested in the Philippines. Over 20 people were arrested and detained. Sudan, Syria, Iraq, Libya. Who are these people? Well, we won't know because they basically jumped bail and they were found not guilty. And according to the Los Angeles Times report, which I mentioned in the talk, it was suggested that the evidence was planted against them. So there's these conflicting reports of, innocence and guilt, and you'll never know because you're always jumping from one idea to the next. It's something that I mentioned in previous talks about the difference between belief and knowledge. The public doesn't, the apparatus, or if you want to say the government, doesn't want you to take an action of yes and no. What they rather have you is a state of inaction, a state of belief, which is paralysis. You can't do anything with it. You basically, you don't know. That's the thing. You don't know. You don't know whether Ramzi Yousef was guilty or innocent regarding Bojinka plot. The evidence against him was destroyed by the CIA. Why? That's another question. Why was that? We saw this again with September 11th. where the CIA withheld information from the FBI and the State Department regarding Al Qaeda operatives living inside the United States. Why? The answer they gave was fruitless, laughable in its own right. That they wanted to turn them as informants. They don't speak English, and the CIA's big complaint during the late 1990s was that the counterterrorism unit never had Arab linguists. So I mean that just fails in its own right. Sean, go ahead, pal.
Okay, am I back on? Here we go. Yeah, I must have had audio issues. Yeah, it's the network structure, isn't it? It's maybe almost even understandable how authorities had a hard time sorting out what was going on because the different groups are loosely connected. And I don't mean to defend too greatly because they obviously have failed in this almost orchestrated fashion. And it is laughable that the figureheads will tell us that we just couldn't have seen this thing coming. Because Bojinka isn't even the only one. There's Air France 8969, where GIA wanted to kamikaze the Eiffel Tower. That was in 1994. So there's enough of a notion in the world of terrorism that such a thing is conceivable. I keep coming back to how is it even possible that such a thing could occur after the Lockerbie bombing, and then even after 1995 when Bojinka plot is uncovered, and our defense agencies like FBI insist that they're going to make the proper adjustments. I think that's another fascinating thing is how come something like 9/11 could even happen in the first place. It's where you run your mouth dry trying to come up with excuses as for why something like this happens. I got some more things I'll bring up too, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah. Hey, the big issue is what was it about the Bojinka plot that the intelligence apparatuses basically got so wrong? I one of the biggest takeaways from Bojinka is that what you raised earlier, Sean, about Condoleezza Rice going to the 9/11 Commission and declaring that we had no idea that they would use planes as weapons, when Rodolfo Mendoza, in his own words, basically said, and he was interviewed by Associated Press after the 9/11 attacks, which I have uploaded on my playlist in the edited TV clips playlist, where he said that he gave the dossier of Abdul Hakim Murad to the FBI, and they did nothing with it. And look, as big as the plot was, and that was a huge plot that involved many big players involved and money that was coming from, the Philippines and Saudi sympathizers as well as other countries, and God knows who else, because we'll never know because the information is destroyed by the CIA. Was that we saw this with 9/11, and we see this. We have context money that was coming from different players that were coming from different countries. Pakistan, for example, where you had the deputy general of the ISI, Mahmoud Ahmed, that gave $125,000 to a known Pakistani terrorist that had connections with British MI6 and the Pakistan ISI and Omar Saeed Sheikh. And that's just one area. You get money from Saudi sympathizers that were coming from Riggs Bank. And where did that account come? Who was in charge of that account? Well, the former U.S. Saudi ambassador to the United States, Bandar bin Sultan, friends to the Bush family. These are just some of the anomalies that are just basically ignored by the 9/11 truth movement in general, because the geopolitics are just so expansive and wide that they rather concentrate on the simplistic side of 9/11, which is ground zero, and the fringe conspiracies that follow from it. And stuff like Bojinka plot, stuff I talk about that Darren and Sean, that you raise as well, and to the other two in the room that come to these Twitter spaces, and you do your own studies into 9/11 and geopolitics, and you'll find that a lot of these issues, previous issues to 9/11, are just small precursors, some bigger than others, to the September 11th attacks. And you'll see operatives, money managers, intelligence agencies, foreign policy guidelines, all have a connection. And you'll all see it. So it's like a puzzle. And you take one piece of the puzzle that fits into another piece. You don't have to force the pieces to make a piece. You go by the connections. And yes, we don't have all the pieces yet, but with enough pieces that we have, I think we can gauge a pretty good picture about what the picture is going to look like overall. The only thing that's against us is a war on twofold. And this is something that I previously mentioned to you guys, is that we're fighting a war of disinformation, which is coming from the fringe conspiracy theorists of the truth movement, and a war of information, which are basically not giving it to us by the U.S. government. One is a war of fruition against the government. One's a war of a useless war. Like I'll say plainly, which is a war with the fringe conspiracy theorists. But they reach a bigger audience because they are victims of the U.S. federal government. Some of them are, when it comes to propaganda. And so that would be my critique, if you will, of people that not understand what Bojinka is. And I can understand if you're 25, 30 years old, yeah, I mean, this happened almost 30 years ago, but this is, and it's such an important history. And again, Sean, to go back to the point that you made about Operation Northwoods, which is constantly used by 9/11 Truth Movement to say, you see, this shows that, fake planes, that the government will use like operations like that. Well, no, one is an operation that basically saw foreign government involving an attack inside the United States. That's not what we saw. We saw foreign entities attack the United States from within. And plus two, pretty hard to call from a plane that is a drone. Now, if you're going to say that the phone calls are fake, good luck, because we didn't have cell phones during Operation Northwoods. We didn't have the airline phones in those planes as well invented yet. So yeah, 2001 we had air phones, we had cell phones, we had people on the planes. So if you're going to say that 9/11 is an operation of the U.S. government, you would think that no calls would be made, and the operation would still continue, unhinged, unfettered, not unhinged, but unfettered, uninterrupted. Why would they allow phone calls? Just say, hey, no phone calls were made, right? That would make more sense. But we're talking about the truth movement here, so. But yeah, hey, listen, you know what? We'll wrap it up. And thanks, guys, for coming. Luigi, Sean, Darren, as usual, great questions. Thank you very much for coming. Next week, again, maybe we'll do it an hour earlier, 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever. Make it a little bit earlier, more feasible, because it is Saturday night. You guys probably go out and do stuff. So, but yeah, I'll try to make it earlier. And really, thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.